Tens of thousands of troops of the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization have been positioned along Ukraine's western borders for months. They have the most sophisticated war machinery in the world. Their leaders have issued thundering threats to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and yet Russia has unleashed air power, tanks, thousands of troops, and has invaded Ukraine. Ukrainian civilians, reservists, and troops are fighting a valiant but unequal battle. More than 100 people, including children, have been killed. So where is NATO? Why isn't it fighting back? Lieutenant General Atta Hasnain and Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan of the Indian Army have decades of experience dealing with cross-border insurgencies and full-fledged wars. In an exclusive conversation with Times Online, the generals provide the answers. Russia has invaded Ukraine. More than 100 persons, including children, are dead, more than 1,000 injured. The small Ukrainian army is fighting the Russian juggernaut. Thousands of US and NATO troops are present on Ukraine's western borders, and yet NATO says they can't enter Ukraine. What else can it do against Russia?
One of the things is proxy war. Now, Iraq was a typical hybrid war. Today, this term hybrid conflict is being used in this parlance of Ukraine, Iraq, Kashmir, all over at the moment. It's not something new. It's been there before, but it's been given a new fillip, basically because of developing technologies, particularly in the field of information technology, right? The ability to pass your messages quickly, the ability to convey messages to a mass population, mass communication methodologies. For example, if you're seeing yesterday's photographs, the Russians are using it very, very effectively. 5 helicopters over Kyiv, showing them in a surveillance kind of a mode. And this photograph is being shown to the world. It is being shown to the Ukrainian population to see how powerful Russia is, right? So imagery is very, very important. The Iraqi model can be played out in Ukraine quite effectively. There is effective Ukrainian nationalism today, right? And the Ukrainian president has promised that, in fact, he's advised his nation to go ahead and fight to the last.
NATO has huge numbers in the case of cruise missiles, standoff weapon systems. So the first thing that NATO would do if it was hitting Russia, it would hit them with standoff missiles and a huge cyber attack. Russia has great resources, but in comparison with NATO countries and America, Russian resources are simply not there. In case you did do something, you would start with standoff weapon systems. You would start with isolation of Russian cities. You would start with hitting the Russian vital areas, vital points. And you would use your Tomahawk missiles, you would use your cruise missiles, you would use your cyber capabilities to totally isolate Russia from the rest of the world. You cut off their internet, and et cetera, et cetera. NATO has huge ability to get in their ground troops, get in special forces. They could airdrop special forces in places where Russian army is isolated, in places where they have overextended themselves, especially in the case of Ukraine. In case this was to last longer, this war was to last longer, then many isolated Russian troops could be encircled and hit.
But NATO will do none of that. It says it cannot enter Ukraine because it's a non-NATO country. That rings hollow. It didn't think twice about going into Iraq and Afghanistan, also non-NATO countries. So why the hesitation over Ukraine?
No one wants to get involved in it because they know what is going to happen at the hustings otherwise tomorrow. How are they going to manage their own electoral scenarios? All these are democracies. After all, so what is going to ultimately happen in their electoral scenarios? Secondly, everyone has realized that conventional war is a very, very expensive thing. See what's happened in Afghanistan. I mean, the estimates range from $1 to $3 trillion. The Americans lost 2,400 soldiers in a matter of 20 years, right? They lost 3,800 military contractors. More military contractors died than the number of soldiers of the United States. So it is a question of attempting to outsource war. Conventional operations is being looked at as outsourcing more than anything else. So no one has this kind of stomach today to fight conventional wars. That is what Putin has taken advantage of.
Could they do it? Should they do it? And if they do it, what might happen? If it's a much weaker opponent, Americans would have cobbled up, as they did against Iraq, as they did in Afghanistan. They would have cobbled up an alliance, gone inside, sat down in Kuwait, and decided when to launch the next Gulf War. Is NATO ready for war? If you were to look at the larger countries of NATO, let's start with the US. US have moved a total of 3,000 troops to Poland. 3,000 is a brigade. Germany is not ready to fight at the moment. So economically, none of the European countries are ready for war. Psychologically, none of the European countries are ready for war. All of them have just started recovering from the third or the fourth phase of the corona, right? And they're definitely not ready to now mobilize their troops. So President Putin has kept all this in mind when he has hit Ukraine at the time when he has hit. War is now not just fought on the battlefield, it's fought on all the battlefields, right? And on all the battlefields at the present moment, NATO is not ready.
NATO went into Afghanistan in 2001. The Great Recession from 2007 to 2009 did not halt its operations there. NATO left Afghanistan only in 2021. So something else is holding NATO back from Ukraine. Could it be the recent threat by President Vladimir Putin? Listen in.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным.
During the Cold War, if you remember, NATO as such did not have matching strengths in terms of the number of troops, the number of tanks that Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union had at that time. And it was always presumed that should the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact attempt to invade Western Europe, then ultimately it would be the nuclear deterrence which would play, right? And that is what was holding the whole thing together. Today's environment, you are looking at conventional means of deterrence. Russians are not going to get deterred by conventional means. That's one thing is very clear. He didn't don't say it in so many words, but he did hint towards it. I'm surprised that the American leadership or the NATO leadership hasn't really referred to it. It would have become a very dangerous thing. Putting boots on ground, what could have deterred is obviously a nuclear threat. But I think the world seems to have gone past that for the moment. This is a typical Cold War kind of a strategy. It would have been a Cold War kind of a strategy. This is not something which has been tried and tested in the last many years. Otherwise, if you remember in the Cold War, you had the Bay of Pigs as far as Cuba was concerned. And many times the whole buildup was always on deterrence through the nuclear means. That somehow seems to have vanished as far as the European theater is concerned.
I have, as you know, I was the Strike Corps commander of India. I have carried out a very big exercise with the Russian army. And I have seen that they are willing to use their nuclear weapons at the first instance. Because to them, they say, if we don't use it now, we don't survive. So the Russians not only have it, they have exercised with it, they have planned it, and they are willing to use nuclear weapons. The Russian ability and the willingness to use these weapons of mass destruction simply prevents any kind of boots on the ground by NATO. If NATO comes in its Third World War, then it's the globe that is at war, definitely not Ukraine and Russia.
India and Pakistan are nuclear weapon states too. India conducted successful lightning strikes against Pakistan. Now the Ukrainians are begging NATO for air cover. Surely NATO can do that without risking a nuclear war.
Always possible to put in an air cover. But for that, you got to, besides putting up missile silos here and there, you will also have to fly physically over that terrain. And in the case of the Air Force, the moment the Air Force crosses the boundary, it is war. For example, we struck at Balakot, but we decided that we will not go back. We will not repeat it. at that time, right? So that was not an act of war, and we went clearly against a target which was supposed to be it was a terrorist target. As far as the air is concerned, Russia is in total control. I don't think NATO would risk doing a thing like this, because the moment you put your neck out and you start giving this kind of security cover, there's bound to be a contact. And if that happens, then there is war.
The Balakot strikes were not in Kashmir-held Pakistan. It was on mainland Pakistan, the airstrikes. But we worked it out in the system that Pakistan may not or should not react with nuclear weapons for this particular thing because of a whole host of other issues. We kept it below a certain threshold. With Putin and with NATO, there is no such threshold. There's absolutely no threshold. That if you come inside Ukraine, I will react with the greatest power I have. And keeping that issue in mind, NATO has wisely kept out of Ukraine at the moment.
Do you expect a resolution of the conflict soon, or has NATO merely been paying lip service to Ukraine by assuring it protection?
Now, with 120,000 troops, the Russians are entering here. You may capture a few cities, right? You may capture communication centers. You may destroy command and control centers, right? Important airports and things like that. At the end of the day, you'll be left holding these and you'll have nothing with you to fight the insurgency which is bound to come. I do believe, I have no brief for either side. I do believe at the moment that there's a divisiveness taking place within the Russian ranks. Not too many people are supporting Putin's this current strategy of hitting out like this. More civilian casualties, and you'll find greater divisiveness taking place in Russia. So I'm looking at the next 3-4 days as a very crucial period in which, depending on success or the lack of it, the future will be decided.
Service for two reasons. The world is not ready for war, and no European country is ready to go into war. And if you're not ready for war, you simply can't fight it. Putin mobilized the Russian army so quickly that the world simply could not match Putin's ability to mobilize his army. So remember, geographically, Ukraine is a neighbor of Russia. Ukraine has up to 20 to 30% of its citizens which support Russia's actions. Right? There are much other greater advantages that Russia has in Ukraine that NATO does not have.
General Hasnain, General Chauhan, has NATO lost the war against Russia even before it began?
That's a very that's a loaded question, all right.
At this particular moment, this game is over.